Is the point of these conversations to convince others that their evidence is insufficient for them to believe or insufficient for you to believe?
Hmm. Neither.
All right.
I, I engage in debates and discussions because I want to get to the truth. If in fact I'm wrong and they have good reason and evidence, then I'd like to know that. And if the caller is wrong, I'd like to either perhaps help them try to realize that. But we also know that once someone has made a public profession and defended it publicly, they're less likely to change their mind. And in the 19 years that I've been doing these call in shows, it's very rare that somebody changes their mind live during a call. What I'm trying to do is have this sort of discussion so that the people who are sitting out there who agree with the caller, who agree with the caller for the same reason that the caller is arguing on behalf of, they get the benefit of having their views challenged without the drawback of being in the spotlight. And so that gives them the ability to think. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I would love to know it. But I don't go into it going, "Hey, let me point out to every caller why they're wrong or why we don't believe them or why it's not good enough reason." That tends to happen, but it's not the goal. If I'm wrong, I wanna know.
Well,
There's also
I mean,
option.
oh, go ahead, Paul. Thanks. Sorry.
All I was gonna say is, so Matt gave option C, and that is, if the conversation is for the sake of someone who's listening who might say have the opinion of the caller. Earlier in this show, we actually had someone from column D, and that is for whom someone who has these kind of conversations but doesn't know how to articulate their own opinions particularly well because it's just not a conversation they have on a regular basis. So if they can tune in to a show like this where we regularly have these conversations, someone like Matt in particular and me slowly, we're getting a little bit better at articulating our points and using some unique phraseology perhaps that can help. So, let's call him D as well as someone who may agree with me, who is just looking for a way to to articulate those things. And then there's answer E. For me, a lot of the times, I am attempting just to demonstrate that these conversations are even possible.
Yeah.
And because I'm trying to have these conversations always with the best chance to be amiable and to be polite and to find common ground and not let it explode into the kind of conversation you might have at a heated Thanksgiving dinner or with someone you don't like, so there's lots of different choices and there's probably a whole bunch that I didn't even list, but those are some of the reasons I do this.
Yeah. So everything that you guys said makes a ton of sense. One of the things that inspired this question is something that I expect both of you, but especially Matt is familiar with, which is the what do you believe and why framing.
Mm.
And so I guess that's what was inspiring this question. That when you ask someone why do they believe X and Y, is it to demonstrate that their process for reaching any given conclusion is flawed, or is it to demonstrate that they can't convince you? So, for example, and I know Paul, you've talked about, and Matt, you've talked about this too, but you've talked about personal testimony a lot, and personal testimony is impossibly convincing to a third party, but it doesn't in and of itself disprove the veracity of that thing. So I'm just kind of trying to wonder how you guys interact with that conflict, I guess.
Yeah. So a minute ago, you kind of asked, even though I think we kind of addressed this, if we're doing this to show that the caller can't convince us, or if I'm doing it because I want to show that the caller can't convince me. And to some extent, that's the exact opposite of what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to show that they can convince me, that I can be convinced of anything if there's sufficient evidence, if it's presented, if you have a valid, structured argument with sound premises, you can convince me of anything. And if I remain unconvinced, what I'm trying to do is show them why I'm unconvinced. What is wrong with their argument? Is it invalid in structure? Not is it not sound? Is there no good reason to believe this? So I'm showing people how, hopefully, I'm showing people how to do a lot of things, including screw up on occasion, but I'm showing people how to think critically about here's pick any two people where one person is convinced of something and the other person is not convinced of it. It may be that we don't know what the truth of that situation is, but we can still evaluate why the one person is convinced and determine whether or not they should be. And if the person who is unconvinced is being, obstinate, if they've confused skepticism for cynicism, where, oh, you're nothing you can say will ever convince me. Yeah. To me, my goal is not to show them that they can't convince me. It's to show them that they absolutely could if they had sufficient evidence in an argument. Yeah, that's a cool one.
Right. So I'm sitting here by myself, nodding to myself at what both of you guys are saying. But so all of that makes a ton of sense to me, and I don't want to waste too much more of your time. But I guess to wrap it up, I had one final question for you guys, which is one of the comments that I often hear in these kinds of debates, particularly within the context of presupposition, is that reasons for any given condition are sufficiently justified by God. Now, I have an answer that I don't find completely compelling to myself, but I'm curious what you guys would have to the challenge that whatever situation that you find to be objectionable isn't sufficiently justified to someone that has more access to information than you do.
I'm not sure that I followed the question. I thought, yeah. Can you rephrase the question just a little? Because I
Sure.
somehow got lost
Me too.
somewhere.
Sure. Yeah, no worries. So frequently when we object to conditions of existence, like for example, the problem of evil, a presuppositionalist will say that the reason that this exists is because God is sufficiently justified. There are reasons that we don't understand, also known as the mystery of God, right? How do you respond to that response? That the unknowability of God and that his reasons would be sufficient, even if we don't understand them,
Yeah. Okay.
are in and of themselves a response to the question.
Okay. So I'm going to let Paul answer this at least to start with, but I also want to point out that you said a presuppositionalist. Let me chime in with my pet peeve. There's nothing about this that is tied necessarily to presuppositionalist apologetics. The problem of evil is something that, so there's no point. I'm bringing it up because I can't count how many times I've seen atheists use presuppositionalist as if it's a slur or a catch-all for whatever gobbledygook they feel they're having to deal with. And so there's a legitimate problem of evil question, and it does, whether you're a presuppositionalist or not, there has to be some sort of explanation for it. And so you're asking, how do you respond to, and we'll let Paul respond to, God knows more than us, and God has a better
Yeah.
understanding of all this than us. And so who are you to determine that God doesn't have sufficient reason to allow for, cancer?
I might be the entirely
Right.
wrong atheist to ask about this. I've debated Bart Ehrman on this offline. Personally, he thinks the problem of evil is a big deal. I do not think the problem of
Me neither.
evil is a big deal. I think that the answer of God, if there's a God the way the Christian story worldview describes, it is, to me, it's entirely conceivable, just like it was entirely conceivable, earlier, that he could do a virgin birth. That, if that description of that God is accurate, that one, he may well have a moral reason that I don't understand, like a 7D chess, as it were, like, that he's allowing me to have cancer so that 6 generations down the road, something will happen that is a desirable outcome. Like, I'm on board. So this, unfortunately, you probably asked the wrong person. If you were looking for me to say the opposite, if I want to answer your question from before, when you were saying, like, a better example might have been the personal testimony that you gave earlier, where someone's going to call in and they say, well, I have this personal testimony that I had cancer and it was cured. And but there's no document, like, and or that I had this personal experience and God said it was really real to me, that wouldn't be convincing to me. So that would be maybe be a better example where you're driving to. But I understand that that is still at the same time the thing that is most likely to turn me back to Christianity, because I've seen, I think, what are the best arguments, and I've seen what the best, evidence that's available, and that's not convincing. But perhaps if God did directly speak to me and I could verify in some sense that I wasn't hallucinating, if he gave me external information and things like that, for me, that would maybe, be the thing that would get me there. But I would then still understand that my personal testimony in that experience is no good for anyone else. It doesn't help my neighbor. It doesn't help my friends. You know, God needs to, in that case, if that's his plan, would need to go around and individually do these kind of things. So someone calling it their personal testimony, I like to discuss with them and to explain to them why that's not good information for a third party. So I think those are helpful conversations. But again, that I think, driving to your question, I deal with it in trying to demonstrate why it's not helpful. And the whole problem of evil thing, you lost me. So I'll hand back to Matt.
Yeah. And so this, I've thought of something, John, that I know I've said before, and let me just say that I pretty much completely agree with Paul again, in that I don't find the problem of evil particularly compelling. I know many people do. I know it's the reason why many people have left their religion. I don't find it all that compelling. But I will say this: if you're looking for ways to address when this comes up, here's the
Yeah.
questions that I want to know from the apologist. Number one, why can't God explain his reasoning to me in a way that I can understand? Now, maybe God is playing 7D chess, but I want to know, why can't God explain it to me in a way that I can understand? And the second part of that is, why doesn't he even try to explain? And the apologist can come back and say, well, he knows, what the result of that explanation is going to be, so there's no point in him trying. And I'm like, okay, how is that scenario any different from my point of view of that God not existing, a God that's not going to interact with me to even attempt to explain it? But then there's a follow-up question, which is, why couldn't God create us in a way that we could understand? The notion that there's some barrier to communication, is God just an ineffective communicator? But no matter how they answer those, it then gets to the what I think is the final nail in the coffin for this line of discussion, which is, how can a God possibly fault me for failing to understand something that he knows I can't understand, did not create me capable of understanding, never made an attempt to explain it in a way I could understand? How can I be faulted for failing to achieve something that the individual who created me made sure I couldn't conceive? It's the death knell for this. Oh, God works in mysterious ways. Yeah, and those mysterious ways are identical to him not existing.
So, so Matt, I sincerely did not intend for this call to go on as long as it did, but the thing that you just said, so I understand what you're saying. All of these things don't necessarily are unconvincing in and of themselves right now, but the context in which you frame this is, why wouldn't God convince me right this moment that this is the case? But how would you respond to the challenge that this is incremental, this is progressive, that this is part of, you aren't going to come to Jesus, Buddha, whatever, until a second before you die.
Okay.
Okay.
I don't see how that's a response to any of it. It seems to me more like another excuse, like the people who say, I'll find out after I die. Okay. There's nothing I can do about it. I'm doing everything that I can do. And if there is some God who's willing to judge me for failing to do something that I am literally incapable of, when he specifically created me and seemingly created me knowing that this was going to be the situation. If God created the universe, and God could have created the universe differently, but that means that God specifically chose to pick the universe in which I can't understand his reasoning, and in a universe in which he does not attempt to explain that, and a universe in which he judges me for that. I am completely a leaf on the wind of a God. I have no decision. I have no free will. I have no capacity to act as even an agent. Everything about me was predetermined by the God who created this universe instead of the one where I remained a Christian, or created this universe instead of the one where I'm willing to say, you know what? I don't need to understand it. I'll just trust that a God I've never interacted with, who may not exist, understands it. There, the thing is, this is so irrational that if there is a God, that God is stupid as fuck. And we just had that whole conversation about don't call people stupid. But if you're supposedly the creator of the universe and just incredibly intelligent, and you create a bunch of people and then punish them for failing to be better than you created them, and punish them for not making a decision that they literally cannot make, and punish them for using their brain to assess something when that is exactly how we have to evaluate everything else in the world, then you are an immoral monster. Not you, but the God in question. Unless you are that God, in which case,
Yeah.
why the hell are you asking us questions instead of explaining it to us?
All right, guys. You guys are both wonderful. Please keep doing what you do. It's been a pleasure to talk to you guys.
Thanks, John.
Thanks.
Have a happy Monday. So we've been going at it for about an hour now. We've got one more caller on the line, but there are lines open. So if you are, well, if you're one of the theists who was trying to talk trash in chat, or advocate for a God in chat, you do realize that the mods are just not going to allow that. We're not going to allow that. All you have to do is pick up a phone and dial it. Show that you are, especially if you're a Christian, show that you're unashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ, that it's a power unto salvation, that you are willing to do and fulfill your obligation under 1 Peter 3:15 to call in and tell us the reason for the faith that you have. I don't understand why. Well, I took Christianity seriously when I was a believer. I'm an atheist because I sought to be a better defender of Christianity. And in the process of trying to find a way to better defend Christianity, I found out that, as far as I can tell, that's just not possible. I have seen no better defense than the defense that I offered. And when you start to compare the various apologists, and I know Paul and I have done some things together where we poke fun back at the ones who are trying to do stuff. Wow, thanks, John. That's
Wow.
incredibly impressive, which reminds me, by the way, I believe, and I'll have the producer chime in here, I believe we're going to be reading super chats over $5. Is that right?
Yep, $5 is the threshold for tonight.
Sure. So rather than doing, the $10 threshold for hang up or whatever else, but anything over $5 super chat, we're going to read them after we're done with calls. But and that was so generous that it distracted me from what I was thinking. So Paul, finish my thought for me, because you were paying attention.
Well, actually, no, I equally undistracted. So we were talking about, we would need to, we were vigorous defenders of the faith, and we lost
Yes.
it because we were looking to defend it as true, not to tear it down. So I think it's
Comparing apologists.
weird.
Yeah, comparing apologists. It was a lot of people will make fun of Ray Comfort. I've debated Ray a couple times. I've interacted with him a bunch of different times. Ray is on the weaker end of Christian apologists with regard to
Rigor.
philosophical depth, I would say. But he is consistent and somewhat honest and straightforward, etc. But the arguments that Ray presents are not fundamentally different from the ones that, for example, William Lane Craig would present, where even amongst Christians, those two are viewed on very different tiers with regard to the quality of their apologetics, which is strange to me also. I never really considered this until the words started coming out of my mouth. The notion that there would be tiers of apologists when all of them are supposed to be a vessel for the Holy Spirit to interact with the world and convict human beings in order to allow God to do what God's doing. Why on earth would there ever be a bad apologist? Why? I mean, and granted, we can't tell who is or isn't a true Christian, but it's very strange to me that there would be apologists that even Christians would say, "Oh, they're bad at this." Why would God
Well,
ever?
Frank Turek would say that there's people who play Mozart better than other people who play Mozart, right? That's not Mozart's fault.
True,
Like,
but
it's not God's fault that there are some apologists are better at what they do than others. I guess you could debate
But
why there isn't even a need for apologetics if God is what He says to be. But
Well, you would think that if I was an apologist and wasn't particularly good at it, I would pray and ask God to make me better at it.
Mm,
And then God would either make me better at it, or God would come and say, yeah, engaging in apologetics isn't your thing. That's not why you're here. You're here to support the other apologists. You're here to be the audience member who claps when they say something wonderful. You're here to be the person who tells your neighbor, hey, come with me to listen to what Bill Craig has to say. That's what, but God doesn't appear to do that. Instead, he just seemingly lets people run around with these delusions that they are really doing a good job. Because I'll go in and do a debate on Modern Day Debates or wherever else, and I'll watch chat a little bit. And man, the Christians are always convinced that I am a massive idiot who's been shown up at every opportunity, and that I'm just spewing word salad no matter who I'm up against. And I can be confident that is absolutely not the case, even if it has been the case on some occasion, that I was just speaking gibberish.
right. Well, First Peter actually, unfortunately, doesn't speak specific. First Peter 3 speaks to everyone. It lays, even though I don't think that book is written by Peter or anyone like him, it actually commands all the Christians to always be prepared to give a defense. So they all take it upon themselves to do that. Whereas, gifts like tongues and prophecy and, all the other spiritual gifts that they hospitality, all those things, those are for some people to do. They think apologetics is the one that everyone needs to do. And I guess it makes sense because everyone has their own reasons for believing.
Yeah.
So
Somebody in chat said that Ray Comfort thinks that the I is perfect. And I already replied to chat because I don't think Ray would think that. I would ask him. I haven't spoken to him. Oh, Beta Ray says he outright said it was in one of his videos. Then Ray is saying things that are unbiblical, because nothing in the Bible suggests that anything about human beings as a creation is perfect. As a matter of fact, if you read through Genesis, it's like, and it was good. God did this, and it was good, and it was good. We're fallen. Nobody. It's bizarre to find an apologist who thinks that the I is perfect. But
and he may have misspoken, just as, I prefer scripted videos to live videos because I'm prone to sometimes misspeak something, just as I did there. Because I am also covering Ray Comfort's evolution seminar on my main channel, and he definitely does acknowledge what Matt just said, and that is that the body is fallen and that the I that we have now is not what God intended, which sends Shannon into tizzy because, like, did Eve eating the apple literally change the physiology of our eyes in some way?
yeah,
Like to create a blind spot that wasn't there before or something like that. But so I think Ray is at best inconsistent on this point.
well, maybe somebody can message Ray. He can call in, and we can have a conversation about the I
Sure.
before this goes over. Because I would take a call from Ray.
Absolutely.
I don't plan to ever do another debate with him like that. But on a call-in show, Ray, if you're out there, call in and explain to us whether or not the I is perfect and what you meant,
Mhm.
or did you misspeak?